You can live, you can laugh, you can love. Life with Sujay. Oh,
Hi, I'm Ambassador Susan Johnson Cook. You may know me as Ambassador Sujay or just Sujay. And we thank you for joining us for Sujay Live or Live with Sujay. Just want to let you know today we have a really important show. It's a topic that many of us don't talk about, but it's suicide and suicide prevention. I was a pastor for 32 years and saw so many people suffering. And then following that, I went all over the world fighting for human rights. And trauma added upon trauma can bring stress. A lot of you know my book, Too Blessed to Be Stressed, but today we're going to be talking with some folks from the Here's to Life movement that's gone global. Because not only is it happening in our community even more, but it's happening all over the world. So I want to introduce you to some dynamic folks. Stay with us and do what you can to prevent suicide. We're all ambassadors, ambassadors of hope. Well, we welcome you to Live with Sujay. It is awesome to be together again, and today we have a delightful show. Not the subject matter necessarily, but because of the work that's being done to help this subject matter. So many of us heard the word suicide, and for many years people shied away from it. People didn't talk about it. But what we're seeing now is that there is an increase, not just because of COVID-19 that's touching the globe, but because of the stressors of this life. And so we have today a wonderful panel assembled who are part of the Here's to Life movement, which is a global movement that's tackling not just what's happening in the United States, but all over the world. Some 26 nations are involved in this movement. And I am so proud today to introduce Martha Lacroix. How are you this morning? It's so good to see you.
Doing great. It's good to be alive and good to be part of a movement that will change lives.
We thank you for being the visionary and one of those whose hands have been at the plow for a long time, and we'll talk more about that. Also, we have Bishop J.D. Wiley Taylor. How are you, sir?
I am well. How are you?
Fine, thank you. You bring us greetings from which ministry today?
From the Life Center Cathedral in the city of New Orleans, the Crescent City.
All right. And you're not just there, but you're global, also touching lives of faith leaders. And we'll be talking about that. And then we have a wonderful psychologist, a life psychologist, Dr. Kamani Norrington Sands. How are you today?
I'm blessed. How are you?
Fine. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. And we'll be talking about your clinical work and what you're doing to help around the globe. And then we also have Mary Skelton, who is our legacy ambassador for the Here's to Life. Welcome, Mary. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Sujay. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, Martha, tell us about you were the visionary, but it didn't just happen because you woke up and said, I want to do something about suicide. What was the genesis for this movement?
Well, we began, and thank you for having us, Sujay, and thank you for all you do, because you truly, you people don't know what you do towards the celebration of life. You were the president of Hampton, and you also were the forerunner of in ministry in New York. So thank you for what you're contributing. We are a worldwide umbrella that supports a community of influences for preventing suicide, culminating in a creative artistic expression that educates, touches, moves, and inspires the celebration of life. And May 8th and 9th, you want me to go forward?
Yeah, please. May 8th and 9th in 2021, what's going to happen for us?
It's all about the celebration of life. We have a call to action. We want people to be present to anything, any influence on your life that helped you to celebrate life. We want you to get on there and do some activity that promotes that. I can give an example. Should I continue?
Well, you know what? We'll come back to that because I want to talk about between now and then kind of why we're even here. Mary, you have a unique story. You're a legacy ambassador, but you didn't just wake up one day and volunteer to do this. You have a unique story. Can you share with us what happened in your life?
Yeah, so my mom struggled with depression. As early as 18 years old, she tried to attempt suicide when I was 11. She I helped her through it. I'm the one who had to call the police and, get her squared away. And then 2 years ago, unfortunately, she did end her life by suicide.
Okay.
So my pain has definitely led me to my purpose. And that's why I am partnering with all of you guys to help bring awareness to suicide.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. My condolences, certainly, but your
Thank you.
purpose has been identified from your pain, and thank you for you being a partner, another P, for
Yeah.
this movement, which we so desperately need. But Bishop J.T. Wiley Taylor, the faith community has not been silent from the point that you took over, but there has been a silence in the faith community. And why do you think, what do you attribute that to? And then what do we need to do to go forward? Because you're an ambassador for the faith community globally now.
The faith community has been silent, I think, primarily because for many people there is a taboo uh, to suicide. There is a stigma. And since all religions are basically designed to promote life, our job is to get them to speak up, to become involved, to join the vision God gave Martha, to, first of all, remove that taboo, to deal with that stigma very honestly. And secondly, I think we need to, particularly in times like this, bring our churches, our mosques, our synagogues from behind our walls to touch the lives of people. I heard a message, something the other day I heard about doctors who have a high rate of suicide, and
Yes.
even clergy persons committing suicide. I also think, Ambassador Sujay, that we often say that we're spirit, mind, and body. But in our churches and in our ministries, we tend to deal with the spirit and the body. We
Yes.
neglect the mind, and that's a critical area of our being.
Very much so. I mean, I was a pastor for 32 years, and you could see the mental illness in many of the parishioners as they were joining. What I found that was I couldn't do it all because I wasn't trained to always unpack that. But I did partner with Blanton Peel Institute and other Christian organizations that were able to do that. So we have someone who helps with the mind, Dr. Kamani Norrington Sands. And so you've seen the growth in numbers in terms of suicides right here in the U.S. So you help people after a suicide has happened, but what can also happen before in terms of prevention, which is to celebrate life? What are some things people can do to, number one, recognize the signs, and if they recognize the signs, how do they get the help they need?
Right, right. Well, first, thank you, Ambassador Sujay, for inviting me to be a part of this. My condolences to you also, Mary. I also lost my father to suicide over 30 years ago. So when we think about pain leading to purpose, I definitely relate to that. I think that definitely had a role in me becoming a psychologist. So when we think about the increasing rates, particularly for Black youth, we're now seeing the rates for Black youth increase at a rate that is never done before. So now the rate for Black youth suicide is now outpacing the rate for white youth, which has never happened. So it's incumbent upon all of us, so in the education field, clergy, all fields, all hands on deck, because we're in a crisis situation across the board. And we don't even know the impact of COVID.
Excuse me, what do you attribute the numbers of Black youth, the numbers growing? So what do you attribute that to?
So it's multiple factors. So, when you look at the impact of Black youth in America, let's just say in America, the level of stress and trauma they're experiencing that they don't have an opportunity to process, and there's more trauma on top of trauma, and they're living with, there was actually research that said that Black youth, Black teenage experience racial trauma about 4 or 5 times a day. And this contributes to increased rates of depression. So if you think about that, and you also think about Black youth, particularly in urban areas, are disproportionately exposed to community violence. So you have all this overlay, stress, trauma ongoing, and it's not acknowledged, it's not treated. Many people feel like there's no way out. So when we think about prevention, we really have to think about, number one, how do we validate our youth's experience, or all of our experiences? So how do we acknowledge the difficulties that people are going through, saying that it's courageous, because it really is, to come forward and say, I'm hurting, I need help. We also have to address the stigma in the Black community, particularly, and community about mental health. So there's a number of things that we can do. And so when we do these, increase the conversation, address the stigma, we can also learn and be more receptive to the risk factors. So there's risk factors, which are like a stoplight. So if you think about, stoplight, the green, yellow, red, risk factors are the yellow light. Like, whoa, hold on,
The
there might be
caution,
something
when
going
you
on.
see it blinking.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
something's
then
going on. Definitely.
right. So yellow light for a youth might be comments such as things would be so much better if I'm not here. You might even hear that with adults as well, right? Or they're starting to research ways to hurt themselves. So you start seeing these kind of risk factors. The warning signs are the red lights, the blinking, glaring red lights. So, they're actually making a plan. They've actually stated. A red light is, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to jump off this bridge, or you actually see them accumulating the method in which they plan to kill themselves. You actually see them getting those things together, right? They may also start giving things away.
I want to ask Martha, though, because you also, I want to say, I'm going to come back to you. I want to ask Martha this, though. You saw some red lights just in terms of people being alone and isolated around holiday times. So before there was Here's to Life, you actually had a holiday celebration club, is that correct? Can you tell us?
Yes, we had the Holiday Celebration Club, and it was not, it included people who may not have places that they are going to on the holiday, but it was not solely that. It is for people who don't like to cook, like me and many others, and who just want to celebrate, and they don't want all that commercialism.
Right.
They just want to have a family style gathering. That's what got it started.
So you were really creating safe spaces, though, for people who were feeling alone and isolated during the holiday time, and then it can also mushroom into beyond holidays. This is a question for you as a young adult. Do people in your peer age group receive the message from you easily, or do they say, I need someone else to talk with? What are you finding as an ambassador?
Yeah, they actually are. I've noticed being authentic and sharing creates a space for them to be authentic and share too. I think a lot of us, we tend to try to look good. We tend to try to fit in this bubble of what was created for us. And for me to just be authentic and blunt, and they're looking at me like there's no way. How did because it's not only my mom's death of suicide, I've had other struggles, and I'm just an open book because I want to share to help people, and I feel like the more I share, the more authentic I am, and the more I don't care, then they don't, and they're able to be free too. And I've actually created spaces by just sharing my story and showing up in love, and
I think that's
what be vulnerable too.
Yeah, I think people are looking for the story. Like as open as your heart is, that's how open they're going to be. And we're going to take a break, and we're going to share an information about a story. My personal story is a book called Too Blessed to Be Stressed, and we're going to be right back. We have to take a break, but thank you all for sharing your stories. We'll take a moment for a human break. Listening to Live Sujay. We'll be right back. Thank you for sharing. Hi, this is a big Selah for all of us. In the Bible, the word Selah means pause, and the whole world has been on a pause. 2 books that I hope will be helpful to you at this time. It's stress reducing, and it's good. The word first is called Too Blessed to Be Stressed. Words of wisdom for women and men on the move. When I burnt out my 7th year of pastoring, I didn't have any boundaries, and I was running everywhere. I'm from New York City, 8 million people. I burned out, but God gave me a gift of a sabbatical. And as I walked around the Charles River at Harvard University, the words, "He leads me beside the still waters and restores my soul," was how this book began. I hope this book will be restorative for you. The other one is Balancing Your Life, God's Plan for Hope and a Future, with a foreword by Bishop T.D. Jakes. When I was on tour with him for 2 years, we were going all over the country, and women and men were asking by the hundreds of thousands, how do we get some balance in our life? Well, it's in this book. All of these books you can order from Amazon or any of the online booksellers. But I hope it'll be a blessing to you. Balance, boundaries, stay in your lane, and Selah. That's the formula for a great time this year. And we're back. You're listening to Live with Sujay. I'm Ambassador Sujay, and today we're talking about a topic that a lot of people don't really like to talk about, but it's so important. It's suicide prevention. We're finding that the numbers are climbing not only in the U.S., but globally. And we're here with the leaders of that movement. Here's to Life. In May of 2021, there's going to be a global celebration of life. But today we're tackling some places that we really haven't touched in the church world, in our personal lives, with therapists and psychologists, and with just everyday people. So we're happy to have you. Thank you so much for sharing and staying with us. I want to ask you, Dr. Norrington Sands, we've heard about sharing your story authentically. We've heard about the faith community not really touching this until now. We've heard about the visionary from Arthur Lacroix. Talk to us about connecting those dots.
Absolutely, thank you. So with Mary being very honest about her experience, that breaks the stigma also of survivors. So there's a stigma also for those of us who survived a loved one who's died by suicide. There's so much stigma that a lot of times we go within, right? So I appreciate being vocal because you're breaking the stigma with that, right? And then the bishop was also talking about the clergy being more active and talking about these issues. So that will also break the stigma. And also, Ambassador Sujay, you talked about sometimes when people come into the church, you can tell there's some mental health challenges, right? So how do we bridge the gap and have those warm handoff referrals between clergy and mental health professionals so that we have that connection, because we know that the clergy is usually the first line of healing, right?
Yes,
so how do we make that connection? And then Martha was talking about, the holiday, support, right? And that is so important because having social connection is a protective factor. So we have to build up all the protective factors that we have: spirituality, connection, being honest, transparent, sharing our story, all of these things, because it addresses all the different risk factors and warning signs, because there's not usually one issue that leads someone to suicide. It's a very complex issue. It's a lot of overlapping factors.
Yeah, I want to thank you for sharing your story too. And my condolences to you too.
Thank you.
We thank you that purpose really does birth out of pain. But I want to ask you, Bishop, the church and churches are the places where people share their stories. They come in with their total selves, their mind, body, spirit. You sit first. How do you help other church leaders to identify those signs that Dr. Norrington Sands was talking about that we see so frequently, but we kind of say, let's pray it away? How do you help other professional clergy with this call to life, inspiration, and giving of life?
Let me begin by thanking you, because what you're doing right now is giving this an open door for us to reach others. So thank you for bringing your influence to the table. One of the things I think that the church is being challenged by is this is the least most propitious hour in history for the church to be silent. The world is crying out for leadership, for hope, for strength, for encouragement. People are overwhelmed. People don't know what comes next. And right now, there are a plethora of issues in addition to what people ordinarily go through. Now there's a new set of issues, but this dynamic is also when pastors have to realize that we cannot be the end all be all. Ambassador Sujay, that in the church, the pastor used to be everything. He was everything. It's a different day now. So it is my job to model this by
he or
getting
she.
Yes. I'm sorry.
He or she.
He or she. And so it's my job to network with Dr. Sands to say, listen, I'm sending you to her. And there's also a stigma on people who go to see a psychiatrist in the Black community. That is, listen, I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to deal with your spirit, but your mind needs a person beyond my capacities. And both preachers, male and female, need to say to our people, We are not the end all be all. We have resources, but think for a moment at this dynamic. Here you are giving this a platform. Martha Taylor LaCroix has the vision, but we have two individuals before us right now who have walked through that valley, and that
Yes.
valley of pain that causes us pain even to hear of what they experience. This is the kind of thing Here's to Life could do, and it's going to change the world.
Well, thank you for, we're going to take one more break, but I thank you for saying that because the world is crying out. We'll be right back. You're on Live with Sujay. You know, Bishop Wiley, I am so glad you talked about the world is crying out. And the world is crying out. Globally now, there's a movement afloat. Martha Taylor LaCroix, I look at my cell phone on Saturday mornings. It's 9 o'clock here, but it's lit up. It's Australia, it's Scotland. Can you tell us some of the countries that are involved and how they got involved in this movement?
Well, it was word of mouth, and we have Belgium, we have Sri Lanka, we have Australia. We're opening new countries all the time because we all have one purpose. Suicide is everywhere. And they really are very excited to open the conversation globally. They really are. It is a global, in May, a global concert, telethon, a live forum for all the mental health professionals to zone in on some concerns, and it's a simulcast around the world. But I want to mention one thing briefly. When we talk about suicide, because this we are all races and denominations. This particular focus may be on Black Lives Matter, but in every culture there is someone being suppressed, someone who is not being recognized. And I want to make mention that Vernon Jordan didn't get to be Vernon Jordan if his mother were not a servant in a home. All of us had some little old lady or someone, some grandpa that stood up and gave us the meaning of the celebration of life. Martin Luther King, we have Mandela. All of them went through something. So people needn't think, first we need to know our history to know. Don't think that everything's so horrible. You get all this bad feedback about people of color, but there are some great things that have been done. And the only reason it got through was because there was someone moving them towards the celebration of life in their lives.
Exactly. And I want to thank you, Bishop JC, for saying that, you know, the pastor can't do it all. You know, it used to be like we were a one person operation, but really it's a very complex situation, which is why we need the Dr. Norrington Sands and we need the Marys and we need each other in terms of the movement. And it's not just a Christian issue, it's in every particular culture. So I want to ask you, Dr. Norrington Sands, because of the Black Lives Movement that's happening now, there's a pandemic. We're talking about 400 years out of slavery. We're talking about racism, sexism, oppression in America. We're around Independence Day, but a lot of us still are not free. How do we unpack easily, if you can, what's happened, the trauma that's happened to all of us to prevent us from going into that next stage?
Right. Well, the number one thing is to acknowledge how we're feeling, right? So a lot of times we're very cut off from how we're feeling. We're just like, oh, I'm okay, but you're really not. So really being in touch with how you're feeling, look at why you're feeling that way, right? So look at wellness within context. So, you know, I'm emotionally exhausted because of everything that's going on. So acknowledge what are the issues that's impacting you, and then start reading, start learning about our history. Like Martha was saying, learn about our greatness, right? We have to ground ourselves in our greatness. That's a protective factor. But we also need to have a better understanding of all these factors that have impacted our generational pain. So from our grandmothers on, great grandmothers on. So start reading traumatic slave syndrome. Look, issues of slavery are still functioning. So that sense of hopelessness, all these different things, it's a generational trauma. So we have to look at generational historical trauma, be clear with what that is, look at ways that we're still playing out these issues like skin color division within our community, ways that that plays out, how painful that is, even within families, and all these different issues. For us to be more aware of it, be more vocal about it, have conversations like we're having now about what's going on, because you have to talk about it to heal from it, right? And then seek mental health help if you need it. There's, if you have insurance, all insurance provides mental health coverage. There's also different organizations. You can go through Psychology Today, or I'm a member of the Association of Black Psychologists, the National Association of Black Social Workers. You go to your clergy, you can have a referral from them. So there's so many different options for us to get the mental health help. But as the bishop said, we have to break that stigma of getting help. We are hurting. We've gone through a lot. How can we go through what we've gone through and never heal and be okay?
Exactly. Mary, someone comes to you or you go to someone and you see that there's some signs. What do you tell them? How do you guide them to Dr. Sands or someone else? Where do you send them?
I kind of explore where they're coming from a little bit, because everyone's on such different levels, right? Some people, just like suicide is taboo still, so is seeing a counselor, a therapist, or whatever. So I share with them what I do. Getting in touch to yourself through journaling. I journal every morning. I meditate. We're whole beings. We have to take care of all of it, mental, spiritual, and our well-being through health, right? So I just kind of share tools with them about that. I'll get them plugged into groups that maybe will help them, like, if someone's going through a divorce, or maybe I help, like abused women. If it's children, I have certain organizations I work with that, I get them plugged into. But I think our main need is community, and not division. So it's just trying to get that connection. And if they are willing to get help on a psychological level, I always refer that to. I personally do all of it. And I think it's super beneficial.
They can find their community even during COVID. They can find the community.
There's so many people out there.
Sujays, I want to ask you this. Thank you for sharing that, Mary. Selah is a word in the Bible, particularly in the Psalms, that means to pause. And it seems like the whole world has been put on a pause with COVID-19. So how can one strengthen their spirit during COVID? What are 3 steps to strengthening your spirit during this time, taking a Selah moment? What would you say, Bishop?
First thing I would say, Ambassador, is pause. Do just that. I think some people have tried to keep themselves in the active mode, not realizing that when you come to a pause, you have no choice. And secondly, there comes a time when you the Psalms, be still. There's something in our society. We're hyperactive. We're always moving. We're almost afraid to be still. We're afraid to be quiet. We're going to have to come to understand the power of being quiet and then learning to rest. A lot of people are trying to get back in COVID-19 to bars and to the beach. That's important. But what are they really saying to us? Now, I refer to Dr. Sands, who knows more about this than I do, but I've given some thought to historical post-traumatic stress, and I think that's very real. But take, for example, our situation here in New Orleans. This is a second hit for New Orleans and for the Gulf Coast. We went through Katrina. And the thing I want to share with religious leaders is that I'm open, and I want to be in terms of rest, in terms of recognize what really happened to me when I woke up and said, do I have a congregation? When I came back to a city and an area that was decimated. And I've been concerned that we were too quick in New Orleans to get back to jazz and Mardi Gras and sporting events without dealing with that post-traumatic stress that Dr. Sands is teaching us about. So my words are first, pause. Don't be afraid to pause. Don't be afraid to rest. And then whatever your faith tradition is, it's time to trust.
Yes.
Wow. So Martha, May 2021, going to be celebration of life, and they can find you at the.com or
Here's to Life Global.
Your website.
Number 2. Here's the number 2 lifeglobal.org. And they can
All right.
email.
Here's to lifeglobal.org. The number 2.
Yes,
Here's to
yes,
lifeglobal.org.
yes, yes.
And they'll be able
And
to be part of it. Mm-hmm.
they can join our meetings, 8 a.m. Pacific Coast Time, and email your request to Donna, Donna, dot Pugh, Pugh, at here's the number 2 life global.org.
Okay, Donna.Pugh, Pugh, at here's to life global.
Pugh. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Global.org. So, Dr.
Yes.
Sands, I'm going to give you the last word. All of you have been wonderful. I wish we could go on for another month or so. But Bishop raised an important point. I was on the front lines of 9/11, and there is post-traumatic stress that, comes up every time there's another tragedy. All of that comes up. When the Black Lives Matter started marching, stuff that happened with us from racism came up, bubbled up. So give us 3 steps when things bubble up emotionally and we're reminded of some trauma. What are 3 steps? And you're going to give us the closing words. We have to do a 1, 2, 3. I know it's not that simple, but can you give us 3 closing steps people can do?
Sure. First, I want to acknowledge what you both said in terms of looking at how current issues can be a trigger from past trauma,
Yes.
right? So when we do that, number 1 is to stop and to remind yourself that in this moment you are safe, right? Because when a traumatic incident happens, it shatters all sense of safety. So number 1, pause and look around you, ground yourself and know that you are safe. Number 2, acknowledge how you're feeling.
I want the listeners to do number 1 with us. I want you to know right now, pause. You are safe. I want you to know that. Thank you. Number 2.
Number 2, as I mentioned before, acknowledge, have a connection to how you're feeling, right? So a lot of times we're on the go, like Bishop said, right? We're always, but being busy all the time, that's a trauma symptom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a way for you to discount or distance yourself from how you're feeling. And a lot of times we don't feel safe enough to get in touch with how we're feeling, right? So if you're in a safe space, take inventory of what you're feeling and why you're feeling that way. And the 3rd step is utilize protective factors. If it's a group, like Mary said, if it's, holiday events or, clergy, talking to your friends or family, or getting mental health help, right? So doing those things, recognize, wow, I have some support and getting that support. And we also have hotline numbers, suicide hotline numbers, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there's always somebody there to hear you. And as someone who's lost a loved one to suicide, it's just the sense of knowing that things will get better, but recognizing that when people are in a dark place, they can't see a way out, right? So we have to provide that support to let them know that help is possible. Even if they don't believe it in that moment, we have to be the ambassadors of hope, right? I know things feel terrible right now. I know you feel like things won't get any better, but they will. And we have to really support that.
Where would someone find a support hotline if they're in crisis right now? What's a number?
I'd like to interrupt there because one of our initiatives for Here's to Life is to create a 1 3-digit hotline, the same 3 digits that can be dialed around the world. That's one of our initiatives.
Okay. So do you have a number right now until you get there that people can, how does someone, crisis, how do I find somewhere to go?
So they can contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And I'm going to get that number for you.
Okay, we'll put that on the screen. We'll put
and
that
also, there are...
No, we have to close. We have to close.
Okay, okay.
So, the National Suicide Hotline, and we're going to make sure that you have that number. But there is a number that's going to be easier for you to remember, and they're working on that with the Here's to Life movement. But I want you to know today that you are not alone. Not only are we ambassadors for life and for hope, but we want you to be one as well. We want you to know that you are loved, you are appreciated, you are one of God's wonderful craftsmanship, and we are so excited that you stayed with us today. If someone who's in a traumatic situation or who's in a disturbed situation right now, let them know that they are not alone. You may have to Zoom them, you may have to do it through Instagram or other social media, but find a community that lets them know they have someone who supports them. And I want you to know that we support you. This is Live with Sujay. You've been hearing from wonderful, wonderful ambassadors of hope, Martha LaCroix, Mary Skelton, Bishop J.D. Wiley Taylor, and Dr. Kamani Norrington Sands. Thank you so much for joining me. You are ambassadors. You brought me hope, and I hope that you brought our audience hope as well. God bless until we meet again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, and thank you for tuning in to Live with Sujay. You have been awesome, and I hope these shows have been awesome. If you missed any of them, they'll all be available to you on youtube.com. We're going to be in summer reruns. We're pausing for the cause because just as I share that you need a break, we also want to make sure that we're taking the break, and it'll give you a chance to look again. Some people said they watched a couple of them twice. I hope that you'll also watch them. But this has been a blessing to be with you. Important shows. A talk with Alan Houston, a talk with Pastor Tisha Williams, a talk with Women in Business, Deb Bollinger of The Great Do-Over, Don Diaz of Milagros Day Spa Worldwide, Pastor Tisha Williams, Who's That Lady, and my own company, Charisma Speakers. We want you to tune in to youtube.com, Ambassador Sujay, and you'll have a lot to learn. There's a lot going on. Black Lives Matter, we're responding, suicide prevention, all the issues we hope that are relevant for you. So you've been a blessing, and remember this, you are too blessed to be stressed.